Now, I wonder too about the tech effort. Like, so in the tech sphere, I see a lot of younger entrepreneurs, particularly in my role as an attorney, and we work with a lot of startups, and I'm a patent attorney as well. So I'm in tech often early on, and I see so many of them not really looking to build something, but to become the next best uh, purchase by some mammoth, tech company will just buy them up. So there's a little bit of it's not people really trying to build a company or contribute to capitalism. They're playing a little bit of a startup, lottery, trying to bring attention to themselves, get their app or their programmer or their platform sucked up, and they can, all retire at 22 or 26, whatever it is. So there's that question I bring in too. Are they really trying to contribute to a solid capitalist society, or are they running a kind of a little bit of a lottery scheme?
Hi, welcome back to the Mindful Wealth Podcast. For episodes 27 and episode 28, we're going to be interviewing Aaron Hedges and Paul Knowlton, and they've written a book called Better Capitalism. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We have a lot to get into. Paul, Aaron, just really quick before we get into it, where are you calling in from?
Paul is in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Great, good.
All right, good stuff, gentlemen. So I'm going to kick us off with, I guess, our typical question. So this is the Mindful Wealth podcast, and we're worried about individual success and all the cultural items and group dynamics that affect that success. It's what we end up calling true wealth. So in your opinion, what exactly is true wealth?
I'll start. It's Paul. And thanks for the question, Terrie. I think true wealth is a balance of the aspects that we are as complete human beings. I need a home. I need in my case, a car. Atlanta does not have much public transportation. There are some things I need, but we can also put a cap on those things. We can have what we think is enough. Right. As a balance, I need not just physical things in my wealth bucket, but I need relationships. I need community. I need these intangibles, I suppose, that are part of the package for me.
What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly echo Paul on the idea of enough, which we get into in our book quite a bit. I think a lot of it has to do with well-being as well. So again, a holistic sense. There are certainly material needs that are part of it, but having those, and I would say enjoying them, as opposed to having them but worrying about them or desiring something you still don't have. Being able to enjoy a sense of well-being, which includes material and non-material things, is at least part of what comes to my mind with the idea of true wealth.
And what do you think might be some of the biggest obstacles that people face on the path to true wealth? Would you have any kind of advice to individuals of how we could achieve that balancing act?
Sure. I'll jump in here first, I guess. Again, we have this idea of enough, but that's an easy word to say and maybe a simple concept, but we find that it's not the starting point for most individuals, at least that we have talked to, or even our own life experience. The more default question in our current mode of capitalism and career and wealth tends to be, how much can I get? How much? And there's always a little bit more, right? And so it may seem simplistic, but just starting with, well, what do I actually want? What would be satisfying? What would be enjoyable? In so many words, what's enough? That change in question is maybe, or that needed change in question, maybe one obstacle. We're just asking the wrong question before we ever even get started. And that question then puts us on a hamster wheel of sorts that never really ends as we pursue more rather than enough.
Beautiful.
And for me, a struggle has been recognizing and then rejecting other people's constructs and expectations for me. I mean, I get my parents wanted me to live a quote unquote happy and good life, right? And the teachers and all those people we meet in our journey. But there comes a point where we've got to be confident enough within ourselves. As I hold my fist to my abdomen here, we need to be comfortable enough with ourselves and then congruent enough that the interior person is the same as the exterior person, right? I don't want to have that facade up. I've got to, if I don't want to have the Rolex, or I don't want to have the latest BMW, although those are nice things, they can be enjoyable, right? But if I know myself, I don't want them, I don't need to engage in playing that thing. So those are the two things, right? It's accepting or rejecting what the culture has put on us, and then it's easier to accept or reject once we're consistent and congruent people.
In the very beginning, maybe the first couple paragraphs of Better Capitalism, you guys quote Gloria Steinem, and I really enjoyed this quote. I don't think I've ever seen it before. The truth may set you free, but first it will piss you off. So right before you begin reframing capitalism, introducing mutualism or mutual benefit, can you quickly define that mutualism for us?
Sure. Yeah, Paul, you want to take that one? That comes from a story and your experience. It's a great quote.
So mutualism comes, or this idea of mutual benefit just comes from this understanding that we are, to borrow from Martin Luther King Jr., we are inexplicably in a network of mutuality. We are people who are on a planet with each other. The object lesson is clear. It's we are here with each other. If I think the lesson is we're here to help each other on the journey. For those who can't quite accept that one, maybe we can negotiate and agree that we're at least here not to hurt each other, right? At least let's, if I can't be an island or a world unto myself, and we're an island unto myself for those who want to do that, then at least not interfere with the others. It's the object lesson is clear. Just look around us, and we are here with each other. We've got to recognize that capitalism really isn't commercial Darwinism. It's morphed out to be that, and that's construct has come up that way. But that is not the way it is designed, was I think originally was intended by Adam Smith or some of the others who followed in behind, and those who think carefully about it. I don't think that's the way it should be. I want to deepen a little bit, because you do sort of a takedown of a lot of what we think about. A lot of people read Jesus, Adam Smith, Ayn Rand, MLK, Milton Friedman, and you just one by one go through and say, this is kind of what some of the common thinking is about it, and this is actually how you should think about it. And so you basically do this takedown of an opposition's straw man argument, and introduce, hey, this is really what it is, and that's how you get to this definition or this mutualism or this mutual benefit construct. So can you just kind of go through the favorite? Is your favorite the Jesus takedown or the Rand takedown? Which one do you like the best, and kind of describe that for us?
Oh, that's a loaded question. It's a hard question. I think part of the reason we pick those multiple voices, because we don't want it to all hinge on one thing. We think there are these multiple voices, different places, different times, that do all kind of aim towards this idea of mutualism, as you're saying it, partnership. So if it's all right, maybe we'll just quickly summarize those, since you're bringing attention to that part of the book. But with Jesus, we often find in many circles that people lean very heavily on the idea of loving the neighbor and caring for others, a selflessness, which is truly in the teachings of Jesus. But when he was asked to summarize the law, he said, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we find that too often that as yourself part, for a lot of different reasons, that gets short shift, that gets neglected relative to the neighbor part in a lot of Christian circles. And so we just want to say, hey, both are there, neighbor and self. That's mutual. That's both. So that's a real brief thing in a nutshell. We could certainly go more into it, but we thought that was an important voice for people who are of Christian faith, and just for the influence of Jesus' teachings on, Western history in general, much less the larger world. It's so short, but both parts matter. Love your neighbor as yourself. Don't forget either half of that. Then we do Adam Smith, which Paul did the heavy lifting there.
If I can jump in on that one, and I'll turn it back over to Aaron, but that's probably my favorite one. My favorite one is more Adam Smith, because a couple things happened there. One, I've got these two brilliant nieces. Both are Ivy League graduates, and finance and one of them in private equity right now. She will make more money this year than I probably have made my whole life. But when at graduation, I said, well, somehow the conversation got on to Adam Smith at some point, maybe Wealth of Nations. I said, well, did you know he wrote a book before Wealth of Nations? And she just looked at me dumbfounded and like, no. And this is not a take down on my knees, right? But it was like, I was shocked. I was surprised. And then I asked the other one, purposefully graduated at a different Ivy League school a year or two later, and she'd never heard of theory of moral sentiment. And so that really just opened up a world to me right now, that I'm thinking that all these people who spout off Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations like they ever read it, I'm thinking they never read it. Maybe they read the bumper sticker and that's it. So that really drove me to a deeper understanding, and myself included, right? I'd heard a couple things from college or high school classes about Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations, but I think so many people spout off like probably they do about Jesus or Ayn Rand, but they never actually read the source material. That's why we bring in so much of the source material. We want people to hear what we're saying, but we want them to read for themselves. We want them to just get it and understand it themselves. It's better they should convince themselves than us.
Can I ask you to focus on I want you to play both sides of the Ayn Rand piece. That's the one I hear like so much as negative, and I'd love to hear the positive side.
Sure.
Let's tag team that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can take a stab at that. She's the one that tends to generate the most heated reactions, the most heated. I mean, for and against. She has some diehard fans and some diehard opponents too. And in fact, when we first set out to write the book, we really were thinking, well, we're going to have to dismantle Ayn Rand in order to arrive at partnership. And as Paul said, actually started reading, the actual material. It's kind of interesting what she says for herself, as opposed to what you hear said about her or for her in secondhand and thirdhand, interpretations. We were able to focus some because she herself identified. I mean, she wrote a ton of stuff, just thousands of pages, but she identified John Galt's speech in her novel Atlas Shrugged as, quote, the perfect fictional representation of her philosophy. So that's helpful among this vast library of literature. Hey, we can focus here. It's still a long speech, but that's a really helpful keystone. And when we read that, there's a number of quotes in there that talk about, not viewing each other with a cannibal's lust. That's a quote from Ayn Rand in the speech that she says perfectly represents her philosophy, not viewing other people with a cannibal's lust. And so we often hear about, dog eat dog, and somehow Ayn Rand is the justification for that. And she certainly speaks of the self strongly. She's opposite of Jesus, where we think, well, maybe she's so much about the self and then the neighbor gets lost in the shuffle. But again, when you read her, she talks about aligning interests, not taking advantage of people, being a trader, as she calls, we'd say a partner who seeks mutual value in the exchange. So somewhat to our surprise initially, but her actual words and what she identifies as the best representation of her philosophy speaks of mutuality and against, cannibalism of fellow human beings. Very powerful language.
Yeah, guys, that's like, I really love that, because I feel like so often, when people kind of pick and choose the things that they've heard from the source text, like you say, the fact of just being like, have you actually read it? And have you actually sat with the complexity of those things? Because very often it's the complexity that gets lost in the sound bites.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I had a question for you guys about metrics. And, I hear so often, what you can measure, you can improve, right? Like that's something that we hear a lot. And so in Better Capitalism, you kind of make the point that our sole metric, maybe in the neoliberal era, has become shareholder value and, the primacy of capacity to generate dollars, like basically an economic, but like a purely financial kind of an economic way of measuring success. How do you think, in a nutshell, could I get you guys to frame how this measurement has channeled and structured the way we organize society, so our economic activity?
It's not just a metric, Terrie. It's become the driver, right? It is a measure which now morphed into the head of the spear or the point of the spear. It is then to our society, it has changed us from a market or a capitalist economy to a capitalist society, where everything now has a dollar value. Every interaction has some dollar value placed on it. I generalize, a little bit, but not much. It seems as though you almost can't do somebody a favor without them. Okay, well, let me pay for that, or they can't accept that we are humans interacting with each other, and it doesn't have to be every measure of what we do is based on the economic value or a dollar value. It's my way of seeing it from that question. Do you have another thought or additional thought here?
Well, maybe I could just ask you to go into a little bit more detail. I don't know. I didn't want to interrupt you, but how historically did that come to be? Like, where did that come from? I mean, I know I listened to a YouTube interview where I felt like you did a little bit of the history of that, Paul, but this is the water that we now swim in, but things were not always thus. So how did that come about?
From my perspective, it's this September 1970 Milton Friedman New York Times article where he lays out his ethic. It's just simply his ethic, which was sort of more bald assertion and some bullying, that said this is what the purpose of capitalism and corporations more specifically is to maximize shareholder value. I think we can draw a bright line right there in a lot of different ways. Up till that point, for example, General Motors was considering board members which had things about community concern and economics. Environmental economics. This was in the late 1960s, and they shut those things down just because of basically the bullying, I think, approach that Milton Friedman took in order to get his position across. We are not like all anti-Milton Friedman, right? The man's got lots going on for him, but it's just this narrow issue that we pick with this because it's got such a Molotov cocktail effect on the rest of the country. It just exploded from that point. So I think that's a critical shift for our economics and our psyche in the United States, is that we all grabbed a hold of that one man's narrow ethic in this one condition, and we let it roll out.
Right. And the title of that article, I think, is the social responsibility of business is to increase profit. I think that's the headline title of the article, and that pretty well sums it up. So to the earlier point, maybe you didn't even read the whole article, but you got the bumper sticker, you got the headline, and it took, it really took. Terrie, to your question about how does it show up? I mean, one of the ways it happens is the notion of an externality, that in a corporation, we can basically just not count as a cost something that we don't want to count as a cost. If our metric is increasing, bottom line on a profit and loss statement, and all these chemicals that we would need to pay to dispose of are expensive, well, then we just dump them outside somewhere, and hey, it didn't hurt our metric. It was damaging to everybody in the area, but it didn't count. And so that's, just one example of not counting, and therefore, facilitating unhelpful tendencies, even destructive behavior, because hey, it didn't show up on the one metric that everybody's looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever imagined if that article was never written? If we didn't start off in 1970 with that as the key functional measurement of everything, if that never happened, what might have come about? Have you ever just imagined that? And that's your second book, I think.
That would be an awesome sort of fantasy. I don't use the word awesome too often because it's a bit overused, but that would be a nice world to live in, I think. We may have other challenges, but yeah, that if that ethic wasn't driving everybody, and to your point, Terrie, about the water we swim in, it's the cradle. It starts in the cradle, and we are just evolved in our culture. And then, of course, America does a great job exporting lots of things. We are red, white, and blue Americans, but we do export some things that can be dangerous. And that is one of those things that we have exported over time that has, I think, proven dangerous. Is this idea of and that single metric of maximizing profit.
Mm-hmm. And
other
so
metrics.
I mean, my question then would be, like, I guess you guys have put some thought into what different kind of metrics we might begin to look at and how we might begin to integrate that into our way of thinking, because it's one thing to say, okay, we should try to focus on like I think the environment is like kind of an easy one, right? And like that's something that's become more on people's radar because like that's kind of easier to quantify. But like what other kind of things might we look at as metrics that might shift how we do business?
Yeah, we've got a couple. We like the idea of an enough ratio or different partnership ratios. We have some of this in the book. Some of it is ongoing thinking, and we need to develop it further. But one example is in the idea of just corporate finance. How much cash reserve is enough? Now, again, that applies to individuals certainly, as we open this podcast talking about. It applies to companies too. You do need some cash reserve. It'd be irresponsible not to plan for contingencies and weather, the rainy day, so to speak. But there is a point where you will never use that, and we set that mark basically at 6 months. If you have more than 6 months of reserve, you can run your whole business with no revenue for 6 months. That's plenty. That's surely enough. So beyond that, you may have piles of cash that are effectively worthless. Like you have devalued that asset because it's never going to be used. It's just going to, sit somewhere. It's like cash in a mattress that never is going to get put into practice. So that's one metric is, hey, have enough, but at 6 months, do some, invest in your employees, invest in even dividends, actually give it to the shareholders as opposed to just sitting in the giant corporate mattress. There's a lot of things you could do once you have enough. Another one that we've looked at, maybe not as much in depth, is the ratio of executive pay to either median employee pay or average employee pay. Which following World War II was a pretty modest multiplier. The CEOs, the executives had, a few times more income than the typical line worker, so to speak. It's not uncommon now that would be, 100 times, multiple hundreds of times that a CEO rakes in compared to a worker. And so that's where we're saying there's got to be some kind of partnership ratio here where it's not even about the dollar amount, but just, are you acting like you're all on the same team? And, if it's good times, it's good times for everybody. Or if you're tightening the belt, are you tightening it for everybody? Again, mutual. So that, I don't know if we have a real firm number on that one, but conceptually we're working in that direction to kind of figure out how are we really showing that we're all in the same boat as opposed to massive winners while others are, below the poverty line.
We had suggested actually for CEOs, because some of those ratios are in the thousands now, right? Some CEOs are paid more than 1,000 times the average employee. And of course, pick your superstar CEO. None of them are worth more than 1,000 times the average. It is the organization as a whole that succeeds. And yes, wonderful for he or she who sits in the CEO role and has an organization that's running well. They should be rewarded. But we think perhaps 40 times is probably a reasonable ratio for the average employee versus the highest paid executive. That's not an unreasonable number. As Aaron mentions, right after World War II, that number was in the single digits. The CEO was making 6, maybe 7 times the average employee salary. The other metrics, I like what Dan Price does at Gravity Payments. He has metrics which include things that he would like to reward or things that he thinks provides for uh, a stable employment environment, and these are things with input from his employees, not just what he's dictated, right? But amount of employee student debt that they may be carrying, single family ownership, or at least home ownership, this new family starts. These are, again, not things that he's like dictated, but it's things that speak to the whole well-being of everyone in the organization. So to your point, Terrie, we work on what we measure. So we want to measure those things, we'll work on them, and we'll find a way to pay them.
Yeah. I mean, I know, like, let's say my brother's a tech entrepreneur, right? And like, I know that they're worried about like their net promoter score, right? Like, so I don't think that it's necessarily correct to characterize like some of these firms as being like wholly, I don't know. Is it too black of a vision to say that it's only totally economically driven, when obviously, like, in tech for sure, employee turnover, like if it's a revolving door, you're not gonna be able to be beholden to whatever kind of profitability you want to be beholden to. And like, I guess if I could sort of like poke at that a little bit, I mean, I think one of the arguments that gets made on the other side is that, like, it's the rising tide argument, right? That like, if we're working towards profitability, like presumably you have to keep your employees happy, because if there's a revolving door, it's not going to work. Or like, if you're Amazon, let's say the miracle of Amazon is this incredible supply chain that all of a sudden we all survived COVID and none of us starved to death, right? At least not in North America. And so like, if one looks at that and say like, there is a consumer benefit side to our system where, I mean, there have been real gains. I don't know what you would say to that, in that the fact that there are in a sense other things that are circulating in the ecosystem.
Yeah. I think it's a fair point. And that's why we write about better capitalism. We think capitalism has very much to offer. It can be a hugely value creating way of doing things. Now, it can be distorted, and done poorly, and it's easy to focus and harp on those flaws. But yeah, we think, capitalism and economics and wealth is about creating value. In fact, if you don't create value, it erodes over time. We talk about frictional costs. Every exchange involves some loss. I mean, it takes time to do anything, even to click on a computer screen or on a phone. And most, it took you time to do that. And then it took time for the thing to be shipped. So there's always friction, so to speak, economically, just like there's always friction physically. Things don't just happen. There's a cost to doing business. So we've got to do business that adds value. Paul said earlier, let's not harm each other. But even if it's just neutral, that's a losing game over time, because you're trading back and forth, and the friction erodes as the circulation happens. So absolutely, we are for profit. We want profit to happen, and we want it to be truly profitable. What doesn't work is to say, well, your side of the boat is sinking or their side of the boat is sinking. It's only one boat ultimately. So again, we have to look at all the costs. There's no such thing as an externality, but what are all the costs and all the benefits? The whole ledger, so to speak, and work towards maximizing the value creation and minimizing the harm. Is always going to be a mix, but let's intentionally emphasize the value adding aspects of this and resist the value degrading aspects of it.
Yeah, I love that. That should be the title of this episode. There is no externality.
There you go.
I'm concerned for Amazon with the narrow aspect of the efforts to unionize, right? So I think when there's an effort to unionize, and it's I'm not an expert in this area, or I should say particularly with the Amazon question, but I just, as I read my copy of The Economist, and I see what's happening there, I think that's a bit of a smoke where if the employer's not treating the employees as much as possible as in a partnership perspective, the people see the inequity of the imbalance of the wealth. And I think unions are probably then an answer, not the only answer, but an answer to leveling the playing field. So I think there's a little bit of, concern there when you've got the unionizing efforts. Again, not that unions I can be a fan. It's just that's the struggle there with those kinds of situations or that situation. Now, I wonder too about the tech effort. Like, so in the tech sphere, I see a lot of younger entrepreneurs, particularly in my role as an attorney, and we work with a lot of startups, and I'm a patent attorney as well. So I'm in tech often early on, and I see so many of them not really looking to build something, but to become the next best purchase by some mammoth, tech company will just buy them up. So there's a little bit of a, it's not people really trying to build a company or contribute to capitalism. They're playing a little bit of a startup, lottery, trying to bring attention to themselves, get their app or their programmer or their platform sucked up, and they can, all retire at 22 or 26, whatever it is. So there's that question I bring in too. Are they really trying to contribute to a solid capitalist society, or are they running a kind of a little bit of a lottery scheme?
Scale and sell.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, I think that's a really great point, because I think that's where, I'm in real estate, and it's when you see the speculative manipulation start to come in, that's when you know that something has become corrupted, and maybe it's heading into some sort of a bubble territory or something, because it ceases to be about the actual value created and starts to be about the financial manipulation. Thank you for joining us for episode 27 of the Mindful Wealth podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation with Paul Knowlton and Aaron Hedges, don't hesitate to share it, subscribe, or just shoot us an opinion of what you thought of some of their ideas.